Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Is our tribal brain the key to our success? We'll find out today from Dr. Betsy Holmberg. Dr. Betsy, thanks for being with us today.
It's such a pleasure, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Now, I've heard the term, but I'm really not sure what it is. What is the tribal brain? What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that forever we have all thought that our thoughts come from inside us, that they well up from something deep in our soul, and that's where all of our thoughts and feelings come. And what the latest neuroscience is showing is that we do not have one thought network. We have two. And there's one thought network, which is our central executive, which are the thoughts we choose to have. But then there's this tribal brain, and it developed a really long time ago. This is deep in our evolution. And its entire purpose was to keep us safe by having us in the clan. And to stay in the clan, we had to understand in-groups and out-groups. We had to understand hierarchies and roles, and we had to play the part, essentially. And so this tribal brain runs automatically, and it's vigilant. I like to think of it a lot like our stress system, that it's sitting in the background and constantly monitoring for threat. And what it does is then it comes up and tells you all the ways that it thinks you aren't behaving well enough to stay in the clan. And so this is the source of our negative self-talk, when we feel we're not good enough, when we feel like other people are cooler than we are. Any sort of negative thing that your brain says to you, first of all, is not coming from you, number one. And second of all, is actually bizarrely trying to keep you safe if you were living hundreds of thousands of years ago in a cave with a bunch of other cavemen. So it's pretty wild that this is actually the science of our thoughts.
So in a way, that's good, right? The tribal brain, it's keeping us safe. Like if I hear a loud noise, I'll either jump or turn around or be aware that something happened, a car accident or a boulder or something like that.
I mean, it is good, but at the same time, it's really outdated because it was designed to help us live in a clan of, let's say, 50 to 80, max 150 people, right? And we knew everyone, and we knew what their responses would be, and we knew what triggers would be. And nowadays, we live in a society where we see hundreds of people, and we interact with strangers all the time. And so our tribal brain has this constant need to have us fit in, to have us conform to the clan. And what it is prompting us to do then is conform to all of these different groups that we interact with in our lives. And that is very stressful for our tribal brain, which is why it's so negative and why it's so vigilant, because this is a lot for something that was really designed for 50 to 80 people.
Now, you had another term which I found pretty cool. I think you said the central executive brain. Did I get it correct?
Yes. So the central executive network is your prefrontal cortex. So these are the thoughts you choose to have when you go after a goal, when you solve a problem, when you essentially focus on anything. So this is the network that is active and live when you meditate because you're focused on your breath or you're focused on chant. And the fascinating thing the scientists discovered is that the central executive network, so the thoughts you choose to have, and the tribal brain, the thoughts you listen to, these are an either or system. So either you're listening to your thoughts or you're choosing your thoughts. You can't do both at the same time.
Now that seems where you come in, I would guess that there's a bit of a conflict. Do we listen to, I guess, what was put into our mind through either school, or we're a loser, or we're not a good dancer, or we'll never be a success? Or do we use our executive, what was it called, executive network?
Our central executive
Central
network.
executive
I think
network.
of it as like a CEO brain. You know, for the field of psychology, this is a real game changer because we always assumed the self was our thoughts and feelings. And to now think that, hold on, some of your thoughts and feelings are actually automatic and some of them really don't reflect yourself, really shifts how we think about how we go about our day. So if I feel myself starting to have automatic negative thoughts, I immediately think, oh, there's my tribal brain. And then I go focus on something else. So what it turns into is that who we really are and what the self really is the chooser. Do you choose to listen and believe these automatic thoughts? Or do you choose to, direct your attention somewhere else or pursue something else? And it's really up to us, which is a cool place to be.
It is, but it seems really hard. Now, I'm just using myself, but if I turn on the TV, I can go from almost any day a shooting in a mall someplace to a war in another country to some type of climate disaster, whether it's a hurricane, a snowstorm, a sandstorm or something, or a flood. And boy, within about 6 minutes, I'm worried about so many different things, or it's put so much negative in my mind that I say, how can we get out of this? And that's only the few minutes of the internet or the news on TV, of course, because they're going to play up the most major event and most gruesome. So how do we kind of get ourselves to go with the good guys and the central executive network?
Yeah, so the news is a classic example of where the tribal brain is outdated to our world. It is not prepared to receive that many negative inputs and to have you handle them. And one of the things I've noticed in my research, I call them the three nasties. There are three things that make it impossible for you to shut off your tribal brain. One is stress, one is emotion, and one is fatigue. So, when we're listening to the news, then that creates a stress response that the world is really, it is a dangerous, dangerous place. And when we get enough of a stress response, it shuts down the CEO brain. I actually think of it in terms of inventory terms, like a business approach to it. So the CEO brain was the last thing to evolve. And so it's the first thing out. It's like LIFO. Like, we don't need that. But the tribal brain is considered essential to our survival. And so that's the thing that stays on when we're in a stress response, which is part of what makes stress responses so challenging to handle, is we're getting a lot of automatic negative thoughts when we're in the middle of one.
Now, that's interesting. First of all, I love that term, the three nasties. I think that's something for one of your next articles or a book that's coming up in the future, or a TV show, whatever. But that's something that draws people in. And I actually remember in a part of my life where we were dealing with high number of, financial salespeople, and they actually practiced that in a reverse way that was not good for the consumer. But they tried to get people fatigued, so they weren't thinking at their best, and they purposely would put them under a stressful situation and somewhat emotional one. And they would, if you rated them as salespeople because they did a lot of selling and made a lot of money, they would be considered to be very good salespeople if that was your only standard. How much money did you make? But how they did it was to take people who were not as well educated and, kind of overwhelm them. And they couldn't think clearly, and they didn't do the numbers, and they would just highlight, but look at all the money you're getting, but look at all the money you're getting. And, of course, the people would say, oh, yes, that's good. I'll take care of all my problems. And it would be a short-term solution, but not good for the long term. But they were doing just what you said, the three nasties, and it was nasty to the poor consumer because they didn't get the chance to think through it. This must be very interesting, your work. I'm just thinking every day that, and also very creative on your part. Do you experiment with this, or do you try this out on different groups of people?
I do. I try this with my clients. And the interesting thing is everyone has a different way in terms of how they like to turn off the tribal brain. So I had a male client who felt very stuck and unmotivated and just lethargic about life. And he had a hard time turning off his tribal brain. And what actually worked for him was to think of it like a television that's running in the background. And so for him, he liked the concept of ignoring it more than he liked the concept of turning it off. Whereas I have other clients who love the concept of turning it off, and we call it move the dog. You're essentially, like in wolf packs, there are, wolves sit around, and the alpha will actually walk into other dogs' spaces or wolves' spaces. And what this does is it's a way to assert authority. And if a wolf doesn't move, then that is contesting the alpha's authority, and then they fight, and whoever wins becomes the new alpha. Well, this is what we've gotten wrong. We have let our tribal brains be our alphas forever. We have sat and listened to our thoughts thinking that they're us. And the reality is they're not us, and we have to be the alpha of our brain, and we have to move the dog. we have to get in that space. And so it's when we hear it going, thinking that it's alpha, then it's up to us to turn our focus somewhere else. Whether it's meditation, whether it is even just watching trashy television. If you focus elsewhere, it shuts down this tribal brain, and then you become alpha of your life again.
I think you just hit the title for your second book after your first book, Move the Dog. I love that. I'm writing all your titles on the top of my notes here, and already the page is filled up. Dr. Betsy, before we go further, I'd like to let our audience know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Dr. Betsy Holmberg. She's talking about the tribal brain. And Dr. Betsy, can you tell us the website where we can find out more information?
Sure. It's www.betsyholmberg.com, and that is BetsyHolmberg.
And thank you for spelling that, because I personally misspell names continually, so it makes it easier for our audience. And to our audience also, if you miss part of the show or you want someone else to hear this show, you can go to nccradio.org and simply look for Dr. Betsy Holmberg, Secrets of Success, Tribal Brain, and you'll find it. You can listen to the show on our podcast anywhere, anyplace, anytime. Dr. Betsy, do you see this? Can you give us an example of perhaps an executive you work with that went through this and maybe either changed his or her life, or for the good or for the bad?
Yeah. So from an executive perspective, what I find a lot when I'm doing this work is imposter syndrome. So I get the people that have tried therapy to figure out why they feel like they're a fraud and why they're so insecure, find that therapy doesn't work, and they're looking for a different solution. And so that's where I come in. And with imposter syndrome and feeling that you're a fraud, we actually come down to, there are typically three levers at play. One is that you have the wrong role. And so, for example, I had one person who is a finance person, and they were a manager, and they were told that they needed to speak up more in meetings. They were told they needed to go out and find their own client relationships. And this really rubbed her the wrong way, because she said, I don't want to step on senior leaders' toes. I don't want to do something that really is in their realm and make them hate me. And so we then had to say, okay, your tribal brain has a concept of what your role is, and it seems to not be working. And so for her, she went to her senior leaders and she talked through this, and they said, you have it all wrong. This place is up or out. And so if I'm not doing the roles of the MDs on top of me, then I'm not doing my job correctly. So when you start to lead in meetings, when you start to bring in clients, you're actually giving more time for me to do what I need to be doing. And so this then allowed her tribal brain to completely reform how she thought about her job and helped her feel way more confident stepping up in meetings. So there's places in work where this can be incredibly effective in shifting how we work and what's effective. And actually, the last thing I want to say there, because this is important for everyone, is that our in-person interactions are the checks and balances system that our tribal brain needs. So this is to say, when you're feeling really down and you're feeling like you're doing nothing right, it's when you go talk with your friends or you talk with your family and you tell them that they say you're completely wrong. And they provide that check and that balance. The other side is true too. If you say something really obnoxious or you hurt someone, it's that in-person interaction where you see their facial expression and you go, ooh, that didn't work very well. And this is now unsafe for everyone. And so part of the way to handle your tribal brain, if you are in your tribal brain, is to talk to people, whether it's family and friends, whether it is a hotline, whatever you need, reach out. And that will help also to shut down the tribal brain and get it to see reason. And this is kind of where the whole online world is so challenging, because it's not in person. And so it makes our tribal brain go wild.
And that's what we've heard from other guests. And it seems amazing, because it seems like this is a wonderful invention, giving us more news, more information, etc. But just as you said, it's changing the wiring of our brain, and we're finding out new and different problems. And again, just to amplify something you mentioned, how talking to other people, I found that a lot of us don't realize our qualities until we get to talk to people. We think because we can dance and it comes naturally, everybody can. Well, when people see me dance, they know that's not true. And if they see me hit a golf ball or attempt to hit a golf ball, they know that's not true. But we're all different. We also have skills that we probably don't even realize come naturally. And if you're a radio host like myself, we're talking for a half an hour with a guest every week. For other people, that would be a terrible task. They would hate doing something like that. So what you're bringing out is great. I'm just wondering, how long is it going to be till we see the Dr. Betsy show across from Dr. Phil?
Well, that would be a dream come true. And actually, I'm going to start blogging with Psychology Today. So I'm going to be putting snippets of this up as we go. So feel free to check out there as well to learn more.
I think they're going to have a lot of new readers now that you're going to be part of it, and listeners also. So I'm looking forward to it. Now, does this tribal brain, we hear a lot of people are depressed, they're anxious today, there's so much going on, and then it still gets piled on. Is this helping or hurting?
I am so glad you brought that up, because anxiety and depression, the root of it is that the functional connectivity in your tribal brain has gotten very strong, and it gets a lot of airtime. And so when we sit in our tribal brains and we sit in these negative spirals, that is what creates depression, and that's what creates anxiety. And so the way to to me, this is a brand new way of looking at it, because now I can say, okay, this is an imbalance in my brain. This isn't necessarily something inherent to me or to what happened. Like, this is now something I need to shift. And so the way to start shifting it is through therapy. Antidepressants help to kind of calm the tribal brain so it's not firing as quickly. What this actually speaks to is a fundamental way that these two systems operate that is really a bummer for the human race. And that is that the tribal brain spirals. It goes one thought after another, after another, after another. It loves to just run. And our CEO brain is linear. And so it connects the thoughts and then stops. And so it provides a lot of airtime for the tribal brain. And when we start believing what the tribal brain is saying, we can go to really dark places that end with symptoms of anxiety and depression.
I feel I'm learning so much, almost like I just took a course at an Ivy League school, and I know you're a professor and teach this. It's amazing, all the information that's coming out, and we've only been talking for about not even the first half of the show. What other methods can people use? We hear people taking yoga. We hear that they do meditation, etc. Is this involved at all? Does this help using that executive network?
Yes, it does. And the way I think about it is redirection. So for my entire life, I always thought that having hobbies was kind of a waste of my time. Like, yeah, sure, they're super fun, but I could be doing this and I could be doing that and that I never took the time for them. And what I've seen in this work is actually, it's one of the most important things we can do is to take time for our hobbies. So this is for listeners. What is that thing that you love to do that takes you away from yourself? You know, if it's painting, if it is running, if it's hitting a tennis ball, if it's needle pointing, whatever it is, then make time to do that, because what it's doing is it's strengthening your CEO brain. Anything you focus on and get absorbed in is building that area, and it's protecting you from anxiety and depression. You know, it's weakening your tribal brain. It's making that less strong. And so hobbies and whatever things we can do to redirect our attention into fun and pleasure and, exciting things is fantastic for your overall mental health.
Now, I know you mentioned something about some of the terms we hear today, fake news and conspiracy theories. Does this have anything to do with that? Does this kind of deaden our brain, this tribal brain, or is that just not even related?
Oh, it's completely related. So the technology has really done a number on the human mind on two different fronts. So the first is that everything is so rapid fire in the internet world. I mean, the studies came out that people don't spend more than 17 seconds on a website before moving on to the next one. And our CEO brain is designed to really focus and focus deep. And so all of this rapid fire work that we're doing is actually keeping us in our tribal brain, because it's moving too fast for our central executive network to really focus on. And so it's building that area. And so the tribal brain is based on norms. It's based on what does the clan believe and how do I need to operate and look and act in order to fit into that clan. Our CEO brain is our what's truth and what's false, what's fact, what's logic, what's reason. So when we absorb all of our news online from a place of the tribal brain, we'll believe anything. And the more emotional, the more it pulls on our heartstrings, the more that it incites us as a clan, then almost the more that we'll believe it, the more we will retweet it. And this is part of the problem with how people are getting news today and what our news looks like in the online environment is we have kind of lost truth versus falsity or lie.
I find this fantastic. And when you say taking a break and doing something that's a hobby, to me, just the time of listening to what you have to say and learning about this is fantastic. Before we go further, though, I want our listeners to know that if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Our guest today is Dr. Betsy Holmberg. She is talking about the tribal brain, and you're probably noticing that. And Dr. Betsy, we're going to ask you the website where we can find out more information.
You got it. It's www.betsyholmberg.com, and that's BetsyHolmberg.
And again, to our listeners, if you missed part of the show, you want to go back and hear it slowly again, go to nccradio.org. That's nccradio.org. Look for Secrets of Success. Look for Tribal Brain with Dr. Betsy Holmberg. It's no fee. You can listen anytime, any place, hear a podcast of the show and recommend it to your friends. They can find out about this also. I was listening to a sports show this morning, and they were talking about how even high school and college players, after a game, and they're doing nothing wrong, this is just an average game, but one team has to win, one has to lose, and the losing team and coach are getting these terrible emails and comments on the internet. Oh, I hope you die, your family rots, your dog passes away, and gets, terrible, terrible things. And not just one game where there might be a lot of animosity. This is getting to be on a regular basis. Once again, is this something that's coming out of this tribal brain situation?
100%. And it is devastating people on so many different levels. So what's happening is that if we're looking at stuff rapid fire and we are absorbing and interacting from a tribal brain perspective, then we've essentially turned the animosity that we typically turn to ourselves to the outside world. So when I see anyone that is saying something online like, you all should die, I just can't imagine what their tribal brain is saying to themselves if that's what they would then project outward. So that's something to think about when you think about trolls. But another piece of this is actually a wonderful journalist named Ginger Gorman actually went and started interviewing trolls because she said, we all operate under the assumption that these kind of comments are coming out of people with no job that are living in their parents' basement. But actually, it's a different reality. And that is that these trolls have clans and they have a hierarchy and they're constantly trying to one-up each other and say a more nasty comment or a more negative thing and cause more destruction in other people's lives. So there's actually a kind of clan norm-based reason why a lot of people are showing the kind of hate that they are online. And so it's important for all of us to have that lens to say, this is coming from that side of it. And funny, one of the trolls that she interviewed actually said, it was only when my friends and my family started to point the finger back at me and say, wait, is it you saying all this? That suddenly the whole gig was up, because suddenly again, there was that in-person consequence and there were consequences for him in his everyday life for having done this behavior. And that's part of the huge problems with the online environment is typically people have no consequences for saying utterly abhorrent things.
This is so amazing what you're telling me. And I think that person you mentioned that you said they actually interview these trolls, or they're doing interviews. I think that's another show for us. So if you see their name, tell them to give us a call, because in the world we are in today, and as I said, I was shocked to hear from this sports show, and this was just a local sports show reporting this on TV, that so many coaches are getting these nasty comments. And again, it's not a confrontational game or with animosity, or you hate a certain rival. This is just an average game, and even young high school and college players are being berated for their play and for just average play. You only scored 5 points. You should have had 8 or 9. Oh my gosh, is that what we're going to be insulting, growing youth about?
And what it is, too, is it's people have lost their filter. So the more we live through this tribal brain, the more we don't have a filter for what is important and what's not. And so people will say anything. And it's a really depressing environment because we're not taking into account how this could be received by another person, and what that does to our overall world. It's a bummer.
How about making friends? If I go to play golf and want to make a friend, the golfers sometimes are put together in groups, or relationships, male, female, etc. Is the tribal brain affecting them? Are you finding that in your research?
Yeah, so I kind of think of it, especially with romantic relationships, that there are 4 people in every relationship. They're the 2 people themselves, and then there are 2 tribal brains. And because their tribal brains will flare, and they'll flare over different things. So for some people, like let's say a couple I know, the wife gets very frustrated because the husband is at work. But the husband spends so much time at work because he really wants to make sure he can support the family and, put the kids through college, etc. And so what the wife's tribal brain is saying is, you're getting outgrouped. Your husband cares more about his work clan than he cares about his family clan. That really hurts, and, this is almost, risking your survival. So she feels it as a very negative situation. And the husband is completely confused because he's like, I am doing all this in order to support the family clan. And so we have to take into account, like, whenever we get really triggered by our spouse or by our partner, look at it from the lens of the tribal brain. Do you feel like you're getting outgrouped? Have you assigned your partner a role that you feel they're not playing? So a lot of people think that, your partner should be able to understand exactly what's going on with you and help you without you sharing what that is. And if that's the role we assign them, they're always going to fail. And so it's up to us to talk to them, both of them, and say, hey, you got the role wrong on what you've assigned your partner, and you have to tell him when you need his help.
Dr. Betsy, you have to promise you'll come back, because you've had so many great ideas, and what you've been telling us, we have to learn more. Will you promise us that in the future?
I promise. Absolutely. This is a blast coming and talking.
You have an open invitation. Dr. Betsy Holmberg, once again, give us that website.
www.betsyholmberg.com, BetsyHolmberg.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We want to remind our audience that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.